The race is on, and Adrian Newey will become Aston Martin team principal in 2026 as part of what's described as strategic changes. So what does that mean for the defining technical leader of F1 in the past 4 decades, and how is Andy Cowell's role shifting? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to react to this breaking news is John Noble. Welcome to the Race F1 podcast. This episode is brought to you by Rovo, Atlassian's AI for teamwork. So John, Adrian Newey will become Aston Martin's team principal in 2026 on top of his current role as managing technical partner. So why the change?
I think it's partly been triggered by things not working between Andy Cowell and Adrian Newey. You can even see that it's kind of admitted to or hinted at in the press release where they announced it, where Lawrence Stroll, team owner, talked about mutual agreement, which normally means someone's not happy, they've agreed a new role. Which is we think is what's happened in this case. Obviously, Andy Cowell came in last October as CEO with the mission to get this team ready for Adrian Newey and ready to guide it towards wins and even more potentially from 26. Last winter, he'd seen enough. He felt it wasn't working. He felt there were too many silos, gaps of responsibilities. People spread too thinly. So he made a lot of shake-ups last winter, which included him making himself team principal and moving then team principal Mike Crack into a new role purely on race operations. So this is how they rolled into 2025. Adrian Newey arrived in March, and I think he was pretty clear almost immediately, where he felt the weaknesses were at Aston Martin. We all remember that famous press conference at the Monaco Grand Prix, where Newey talked about their simulation facilities being weak, potentially taking 2 years to fix, and it's rolled on from there. He's found elements of that team where they aren't up to standard. He's pushing on. He wants changes. He wants to change of focus. We saw recently a change of senior aerodynamic personnel. 7 of them moved aside as part of this shift towards greater simulation, areas where Adrian Newey felt things needed to be improved. For what we understand, there were differences of opinion between Newell and Cowell about where things wanted to go. And I think it reached a head where Cowell just felt this wasn't working. He couldn't continue in this role. So he shifted to this new strategy advisory role, where he will help, go back to where he came from. He was head of that Mercedes engine project that took them to many titles. So he'll be that liaison point between Honda, between Aston Martin and Aramco to try to push this project forwards.
You touched on a lot of different areas there, and I guess we should start with perhaps the surprise that Newey and Cowell haven't worked, because regular listeners to the podcast will remember that when the Cowell-Newey partnership arose, it seemed like a pretty good partnership because you had Newey, the kind of design genius, and Cowell could be the organiser, the facilitator. And the fact there is this disconnect between the two of them, I guess, tells you that just because 2 skill sets could fit well together, if they're not completely on the same page, and Adrian Newey, who's famously uncompromising, feels that maybe there's too many compromises on the Cowell side, perhaps, that things don't work. But are you surprised that alliance actually doesn't seem to have had the success that appeared possible?
Yeah, I mean, Andy Cowell's a very successful engineer. He's seen things from an engineering perspective. So you would have thought that Adrian, being very technically minded, that these two would work quite well together. But I guess a lot depends on the speed of change required. That if Adrian felt a lot of these areas of the team weren't working, we want change, not tomorrow, we want it done today. And remember, this is all in the cost cap era as well. So making change now is much more difficult than it was for any team 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So when Red Bull brought Adrian Newey in, for example, you can give him free rein. You can give him the staff he needs. You can improve the facilities. You can improve structures, personnel, put a team around him that works. Whereas now, you're limited in what you do. So if you decide we need more focus on simulation facilities, we need more simulation staff, we need more expertise in that area, then you've got to squeeze the bubble somewhere else. And that's what they've done, obviously, with these aero changes, but there would have been other areas too. So at some point, those personalities didn't work. At some point, there are differences of opinion. And if you're Lawrence Stroll, who's brought Adrian Newey in on a big money deal, and he's voicing his opinion and pushing for change, and there seems to be resistance, whether that resistance is correct or not, then it kind of makes no sense to have a token team principal in who's just going to have to say yes. So I guess this is where the big changes come from.
Yeah, you'd have to say that in some ways this changes nothing, because we knew this team was all in on Adrian Newey before this happened, and the team principal shift almost just sort of puts a little hat on that just to confirm it is the case. But team principal is one of those job titles that's very important in Formula One, but actually it means everything and nothing. And in that regard, although Newey's got his old managing technical partner role and his team principal as well, that doesn't actually necessarily mean he's taking on a vast extra portfolio of work. It's more just confirmation of his primacy and that everything's going to be done his way. That's the way I see it anyway, because he's not going to be a kind of old school team principal. He's not going to spend ages with sponsors, courting them, dealing with this, that, and the other. He'll be focused on the technical side, and the release does state that it's the design work and the engineering track side. It'll be that plus a bit of driver work, really. That's what Newey does. So I can't see it being more than that. Can you?
I think it depends on what the long-term plan is, because there does seem to be a hole now in that organisation structure for someone, because team principals have a lot of responsibilities to do that we don't get to see. They're running staff and operations, keeping staff motivated, looking after staff, doing the hirings and firings, being in team principal meetings, F1 commission meetings, attending almost all the races, getting sponsors on board, speaking to sponsors, keeping sponsors happy. So that there are a lot of responsibilities that somebody in that team has to do. So what isn't clear is Newey becoming team principal now the first step towards someone bigger coming in? Christian Horner's still in the background, still could potentially be interested in some form of deal there. Are they still courting someone like Andreas Seidel to come in a more senior role and fulfill some of these responsibilities? So what isn't clear yet is this the final step? And is Adrian going to have to do some of these things he doesn't like? Or is this just an interim solution as part of something bigger coming?
Well, I think the fact that the CEO title appears to be becoming vacant probably points to the fact that there will be something else coming down the line, because some team principals are team principal and CEO. Actually, their official job title is CEO, because that's kind of company name, whereas team principal is sort of an F1 world title, and every team has to have a nominated team principal effectively, even if they're not necessarily called that. So that's why it's such a versatile title, but it's also kind of in keeping with engineers taking up those roles. I mean, Cowell is an engineer, but became an engineering manager of some repute. So similar in that regard. But it is interesting because, like you say, there are so many different things team principals can do. And even if the expectation is this is primarily totemic for Adrian Newey, there is the risk that it'll kind of pull him into a few areas just by kind of natural gravity that he doesn't want to be. I mean, even dealing with sponsors, if you're talking about sponsoring the team and Adrian Newey's part of the draw, it's easier if he's not the team principal just to sort of say, oh, he's just the genius on his drawing board. He's not running around doing all this stuff. But you might get more partners and people just wanting to take up his time because he's seen as being the team principal and being expected to do that. That's the one thing that makes me wonder, because one thing you don't want Adrian Newey doing is wasting his time doing the things that he's not kind of brilliant at, isn't it?
Yeah, you want Adrian Newey on board because will be these eureka moments of design genius that will help influence the design or influence staff to come up with these great ideas that prove to be game changers and push the team forwards. Even if Adrian Newey has to spend 1 hour a race weekend speaking to sponsors, or has to go to team principal meetings, or then has to lose a day every couple of months going to F1 commission meetings, making decisions, these are all moments where he's not thinking about the number one task, which is coming up with these genius ideas or pushing that design forwards. So that's the uncertainty in this respect, because it's those extra elements. It's the bits that other people can do effectively that you don't want Adrian Newey to do. You want him to be in this design trance that he's talked about. You want him thinking about that car 24/7 to come up with the ideas that no one else has, and that makes you a Formula One winner.
And we should note that the statement they put out says that Executive Chairman Lawrence Stroll continues to lead the business functions of the team. So he's still there in the kind of overall role in that regard. So it's really interesting. I'll be fascinated to hear what Adrian Newey says about this and what he says he does and does not want to get involved in. Again, what they put out focused on the technical and the track side, all the stuff that he's made his magnificent reputation on. So that all makes sense. But sometimes these changes that seem very good on paper have a an ability just to take on a bit of a life of their own. So that'll be the thing I'll be looking out for. Is he dragged into things that he doesn't want to be doing? And also, what other elements does he want to be doing? Because Adrian Newey doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do, does he? So he will also go into this with his eyes open, I'd have thought.
Yeah, it's going to be an all new experience. We don't know yet what the 26 regulations are going to be like. We don't know if Aston Martin is going to turn out of a car that, are they fighting for wins? Are they fighting for podiums? Are they ahead of the midfield? Are they struggling towards the back? That's unclear right now, which therefore makes it unclear how big the job Adrian Newey is going to have next year in terms of pushing his design team forward, pushing Enrico Cardier forwards, pushing that relationship with Honda forwards. There's going to be a lot for him to deal with next year. And if you add on top that team principal role, it seems like, at some point there will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and it will just take away perhaps some of the elements that makes Newey so good.
Yeah, there's a recent interview where Enrico Cardile talked about, he's the chief technical officer, that's his title. He came over from Ferrari, obviously joined this year, where he said that Adrian Newey is the machine driving the design side, or words to that effect. And that's the thing, they need to make sure that he is still the driving force design and technically, and he's not being pushed into other areas. Today's video is brought to you by Rovo, your AI teammate from Atlassian. Rovo connects knowledge, people, and workflows so teams can work smarter and move faster. It helps people find answers, make decisions, and automate work securely and with context through search, chat, agents, and studio. Rovo runs on the Teamwork Graph, Atlassian's intelligent layer that unifies data across all of your first and third-party apps so no knowledge gets left behind, and so you always get personalised AI insights from day one. And the best news? It's already built into Jira, Confluence, and Jira Service Management paid subscriptions, so the power of Rovo is already at your fingertips. Know the feeling when AI turns from tool to teammate. If you Rovo, you know. Discover Rovo, AI that knows your business, powered by Atlassian. Get started at ROV, as in victory, o.com today. Well, regular listeners of the podcast will hear us talk about the Race Members Club a lot, and many of you will be in the Members Club. And if you're interested, we're getting involved in Black Friday with a special offer. You'll be able to get 50% off your first month of membership through this offer, and you'll be able to enjoy some of the content we've got planned for this week. For example, we've got the first episode, early access of it, of the new podcast, The Undercut, which is Damon Hill and Mark Hughes. We've got the Japanese Grand Prix episode of our 93 Revisited series. There'll be in-car insights from the Qatar Grand Prix, which are the kind of informal podcasts we do on race weekends to chat through what's been going on in the day, and lots more. So if you're interested in that, Black Friday is the perfect time because of the 50% off offer. And also, we're running the Race Shop promotion, 20% off everything. That's t-shirts, hoodies, notebooks, and our very special calendars. So that's F1, MotoGP, and Bring Back V10s. All have got stunning photography that's been handpicked by the races team. They're always very, very popular. So go to shop.the-race.com. That's shop.the-race.com to explore the full collection. Or you can hit the link in the episode description. So Black Friday offers both for the shop and for the Race Members Club. So John, let's get back to a name you mentioned in the first part, which is Christian Horner, because there's been a lot of talk about him. As we said, the CEO role is vacant. Various stories floating around about what Horner has or has not done. So what can you tell us about that? Is there more to this than simply he's an obvious person to be linked to any team, given he wants to get back in and he's had so much success?
Well, we know Christian's been speaking to Lawrence Stroll. We know that Christian wasn't just interested in being a team principal. He wants more than that. He wants a shareholding in a team. He wants influence. He wants control. So it would be a senior position if he was going to come back to Formula One. He's been speaking not just to Aston Martin. There were talks of Alpine ongoing. There are some other options, including setting up his own 12th team. So he's evaluating what to do. And I'm not sure that Adrian Newey being made team principal would shut that route off just yet. I think there are decisions to be made quite soon, and you could see Newey slotting into a CEO role there, taking on the larger responsibilities, maybe taking away some of those elements that Adrian Newey doesn't want to waste his time with. We know Christian was very, very good with commercial partners, commercial sponsors, pushing them on. We know Christian Horner loves being in front of a television camera and speaking to the media. We know Christian was very, very good at dealing with staff, dealing with those HR issues, looking after the personnel, motivating people, being as that kind of unifying force to push a team forward. So there are a lot that Christian could still bring to the table, which would then allow Newey to fulfill this extra kind of creative freedom that they say this new role's about.
It's a great example of a situation where the puzzle pieces fit together, both in terms of the fact that obviously Horner, as part of his departure from Red Bull Racing, there is a limitation on when he can join another team, isn't there? So he couldn't do that right now, but that could happen in 26. So it could be as simple as they just need to wait for that to happen. And also the getting the band back together element of Newey and Horner, because I think it's fairly well known there were some rocky moments, shall we say, between the two of them. Their relationship was not what it once was at one stage, but there seems to have been some rapprochement. And the one thing we do know about those two is that they work together very well. And I guess if you're Adrian Newey, you might think, actually, I know that if we go back to the kind of the old way, that we can work together to make this team a real success.
Yeah, I think Formula One has a habit of making people who wouldn't necessarily be close friends work together and become successful partnerships. It's a very competitive business. Only the best qualities get you to the very front of Formula One. And if you want to build a team, part of the role of a team boss, for example, is to get people who can't get on to make them work together so that they create something that's for the greater good. Yes, Adrian and Christian have had their issues in the past. There's, the problems surrounding Christian Horner last year were the reasons why Adrian Newey decided to leave the team. We understand there's been some water under the bridge, but they may still not be the best of friends right now. But that doesn't prevent a working partnership happening. In some cases, it's better the devil you know, because they are well aware of how each other operate. They know each other's strengths and weaknesses. They know there's a mutual respect there, and they would both be fueled by the very same thing, which is turning a Formula One team into world champions.
And as you said, there have been other people who've been linked to it. Andreas Seidel is one who was at McLaren and Sauber. We've had links to Mattia Binotto, who's the CEO of the Sauber Audi project now. So it's not entirely clear where things are going, but it does feel like there is a gap. And I think that's the reason why something else has to happen, because, that CEO type role is empty, isn't it? Because with what Cowell's doing, they've talked about this advisory role, and he's going to be dealing with the partners. Particularly, he's going to be great for working with Honda, isn't he? He's been to Sakura before. He's taken a keen interest in what's going on the engine side because, of course, he ran Brixworth, the Mercedes engine program for a very long time. So he could be extremely effective in a role where he can devote a little bit more time to that, as well as dealing with the Aramcos, the Valvolines, etc., and trying to just tie everything together. So even though it's sort of a sideways move, or a sort of sideways and almost downwards move, you could say, actually, once again, that thing of using people for what they're best at, that could work very, very well if he can be the person that helps to solidify those relationships and just squeeze that little bit more out of the team, out of Aramco, out of Valvoline, out of Honda. And if you can squeeze a little bit more out of all of those, then that's lap time, isn't it?
It is the perfect arena for him. He did it so well at Mercedes. He understood the rule set from 2014. He understood how you need to integrate a successful engine design into a successful chassis with a successful fuel supplier, because there are compromises all along the way. What the chassis designers want isn't necessarily ideal for what an engine designer wants, and what the engine designer wants, the fuel supplier may go, well, we can't really do that. That's not possible. So you've got to get these competing elements all working together. And when you deliver the best compromise, that's where wins and championships come from. So as we head to a rules era where the power unit's going to be absolutely central to performance, you're going to need it, how that ICE works, how its energy recovery works, how the fuel fits into all of that is going to be critical to success, because we may find from 26 that energy recovery, how you can recover that energy, how you deploy it, is the key to success. It could be the key to getting to the front of each Formula One race. It could be the key to defending your position, and it could prove to be even more important than the chassis and how good your wings are or how good your straight line mode is versus your cornering mode. So if you've got someone like Andy Cowell in there pushing that partnership forward, making sure that relationship between Honda, Aston Martin, Aramco is delivering, then that's quite a good big box tick to have.
Yeah, very much so. The worrying thing, though, to look at it from another side, is that there's been a lot of changes over a sequence of years, haven't there? And Adrian Newey joined the team as managing technical partner. If team principal was the obvious thing for him to do, then why wouldn't he have been in that role immediately? Cowell was team principal and CEO, so he's been moved. And there's been this whole sequence of things going on over the past few years. So while some of the personnel movements and the way it could work and what it might lead to could work very well, there's also that question mark hanging over it of, actually, is this indicative of a team that is at risk of not being the sum of its parts, let alone greater than it? It could be very much less than the sum of its very, very significant parts.
It does suggest they're not in the position they want to be and need to be at the moment. If you say we're making this change because it's going to help our new team principal be more creative and have freedoms he hasn't got at the moment, that suggests things weren't perfect right now. It suggests there's change to come, and it suggests you don't know where those limits are and what's going to change. And you get into it's not as bad as Alpine in terms of constant changes of team principal and moving around, but we've gone from Mike Crack to Andy Cowell to Adrian Newey will have been within the space of 12 months, which is Alpine levels of team principal change in such a short time frame.
Yeah, that's never really a good thing. It's one of those situations that you almost end up having to work backwards from where they get to, because let's say the next few years they continue to really disappoint, then you can say, well, actually, this reflects some problems. But then again, it becomes a question of what's the reason for that? Because if the car's really strong next year, but say the Honda power unit isn't, then that's slightly different, because that's much more on Honda, although collaboration is part of it as well. So it really feels like a team that it's still at a point where it can go either way. And it's difficult to make sense of all of these changes until they play out and you see how it works and you hear from people as to what's gone right, what's gone wrong. And it takes time for that to shake out. So there's this assumption, I think, that Aston Martin will get there because there's been so much investment. They've got this incredible factory. Pretty much all of the moves on paper look absolutely right. But you do run the risk of having this sort of like a football club that gets all the right players and the right people and the right facilities, and it's still only 10th in the league and underachieving, and you get this constant change. So I don't think we can necessarily 100% call it, even though the ingredients that are there are all theoretically the right ones.
Well, there's also the element that you have your technical chief as your team principal means there isn't this step removed for an understanding of, if the technical department isn't working and we need to make change, are you able to make the change that you need to do? We've seen it at all teams. Mercedes, for example, when Mike Elliott was made technical director, it didn't work for various reasons, and they had to make a big change, bring James Allison back from his other responsibilities. So big teams sometimes have to make big calls about technical departments and the personnel that aren't working. Is Adrian Newey going to be able to be as critical as potentially he should be and be one step removed from problems that he can't see? So I think sometimes team principals have to be fairly ruthless in terms of what they're doing to make big changes, to sack people they think it's not working, to hire people that potentially could be better and stronger in the future. So, a football team wouldn't have their striker as their captain and their football manager to then decide who the best striker is to go into matches, because you need to be self-critical at times. And that self-criticism sometimes even means thinking who we've got at the moment isn't good enough.
Yeah, and I guess where we have to kind of settle on this is ultimately, as we said, this team is all in on Adrian Newey, and that's always been a good place to be in Formula One in recent decades. So from that perspective, you've got to say this should work, because Newey wouldn't do it if it wasn't the right move. If he didn't believe that it was going to work, if he didn't believe that that will drive the team on technically in the best possible way. And we've obviously talked before in very positive terms about the benefits of, say, Ayo Komatsu becoming team principal at Haas, of Andreas Stella at McLaren, etc. So I think our kind of null hypothesis is that Newey doing what Newey does within a team that's got everything it needs should equal wins, shouldn't it?
It could be fantastic. I'm fascinated to see what someone as competitive as Adrian Newey can do as a team principal. So I think what we've do miss a little bit now, Christian Horner's gone from the paddock, is that troublemaking aspect, that person willing to push boundaries a little bit. We know how ruthlessly competitive Adrian is. It manifests itself in all areas. He loves thinking outside the box. He loves doing things differently. All he cares about is winning. So I'll be really intrigued to see how he pushes that team on. And there may be little tweaks he makes. It could be a genius move. He could, fundamentally change how pit stops are done, for example. Do we need a different approach to this? Or how garages are run, or how we operate race runs on a race weekend? There could be many aspects that he comes in with his left field approach and changes. And it could be fascinating, and could all deliver those marginal gains that are going to make the difference in the end.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note with Newey, anyone who thinks he's a kind of head in the clouds designer who just sort of sits there living in the theoretical world, he is also an enormously practical engineer. He gets how race teams need to work, how cars have to be engineered. He's done all of those things with great success in the past. That's why he's so effective. So definitely don't underestimate Adrian Newey, which is why I think we have to assume this will work. It's worth us just reflecting on where Aston Martin are now as well, John, because it's been a curious life for this team since Racing Point was, what was Force India was acquired. Racing Point was created, then it became Aston Martin, because that great leap forward when they started racking up the podiums a few years ago, the past couple of seasons have been very, very difficult, very disappointing. They've currently got a car that on the right kind of track can be the lead midfielder, on the wrong kind of track can be right at the back of that midfield pack. So it's been all over the shop, really. And you'd have to say not living up to the potential over the past 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's consistency they've lacked. And that consistency manifests itself in terms of not being able to bring upgrades that work and repeated, and you get that chain of development. It's almost an opposite to, Ferrari famously starts seasons very slowly, and then manages to improve it, ends the season quite well, and then steps back again over the winter. Whereas Aston Martin, apart from the start of 23 when it was brilliant, so close to winning races, arguably should have won Monaco that year, but that they weren't able to develop the car as well as they liked. And then they lost their way ever since. They never found that consistent ability to improve. Part of it probably came down to those elements that Andy Cowell found, which were the silo mentality, the kind of people's responsibilities spread too thinly between those at the factory, those at the race team, not having the facilities as good as they are. So with Newey on board now, he's all about those processes. It's all about firing ideas into the system. It's all about realizing those ideas and making sure those ideas work before they make it onto the car. So the elements are there that should make it push on forwards. But it's hard for us to judge, and I think this season is especially difficult because teams aren't bringing major upgrades to their cars regularly. We aren't seeing how much they're improving because there's a world going on at the factory where they're pushing on, working on 26 car, improving processes, improving personnel, improving the firing of ideas. But we won't see the manifestation of that until we get to, Bahrain or Melbourne next year, and maybe not even then, because what will be key is not how you start next season, because it's all up in the air, but are you able to build on the foundations you've got and then push on forwards through the rest of the year?
That's the thing, isn't it? Because regardless of what happens on track, it doesn't really matter whether Aston Martin's 7th, 8th or 9th in the championship. I mean, it makes a financial difference, but the team does have the finances to spend, etc. So it's not going to be caught short in that regard if they slip down to 9th in the championship or something by the end of the season. But it's all of that work that's going on back at the factory, and the integration of Newey, who obviously hasn't been there that long either. And that's the key thing, isn't it? It's where can they be for the start of 26 Is 26 a little bit too early for this project in the grand scheme of things? Is Honda going to be ready with a power unit that's capable of winning races and fighting at the fronts? Those are the two big questions, because they're two big boxes to tick in terms of having the car and the power unit to actually do what they want to do next year. And if you start poorly, then that's you on the back foot for quite a long time in the rule cycle. So it's again, it's really, really hard to measure how well what's gone on at the factory has been executed over the course of the year. And these changes don't inspire enormous confidence, except for the fact that you've got that underlying Newey confidence. It says things aren't entirely right yet.
Yeah, I would suggest if everything was perfect and Adrian Newey had found a team that was well placed to roar into 26, that all the facilities are great, the staff are great, everyone was working perfectly together, then there wouldn't have been grounds for conflict and disagreements about the direction that was needed, or the need to make change, or we need to shift focus in this area. So that we've ended up at this point suggests change was needed, suggests the scale of that change wasn't necessarily sorted. So I would suggest that any talk that even Newey himself thinks that they're going to be starting next season on the front foot probably isn't there. But equally, I don't think anyone knows where they're at for 26. I think people who are confident in knowing where they are going to be are probably being a bit naive in terms of where all the uncertainties are with the 2026 regulations. So I think it's all up in the air. I think there's going to be a lot of nervousness and angst among designers right now about what's happening. So I think everyone's going to be feeling a little bit on the back foot and thinking that we need to respond and get on the front foot as soon as those cars appear next January to work out who's really nailed these new regulations.
It does also occur to me that it's got the potential to be an astounding and unexpected chapter in the Newey story, isn't it? You know, this visionary who realised how important aerodynamics was going to be, who aspired to be an aerodynamicist, came into F1 with the Fittipaldi team and has gone on to basically define modern Grand Prix racing. And then you have this unexpected step with a team that's upwardly mobile. It almost one of those things where you think the narrative gods demand that this is a success. Even if 26 isn't the moment, it means in 27, 28, 29, it could become a kind of crowning glory as Adrian Newey takes this team to the front and wins a championship as team principal.
Yeah, it will be fascinating to see how it goes, because there's often been this kind of impression from team bosses who've worked with Newey is that his genius kind of needs shaping a little bit and needs putting within boundaries to stop becoming so extreme. So you've got to make these genius ideas work in the real world. So now he's team principal and he's in charge of these genius ideas and where things are going. He won't be able to keep himself in check in some respects, because these are his ideas. He'll want to see them realised. So actually, is he based entirely in reality? Is what he thinks possible and can be achieved, and he actually pushes this team on to deliver an edge that nobody else can have.
Yeah, there's a good example of how that can also work in another way, in terms of the ability to have people around you who can achieve the impossible, if you like, in terms of the 2010 Red Bull and the idea he had for putting the batteries for KERS within the gearbox. And he writes about this very interestingly in his book. And he says, well, I just thought about the idea, but Rob Marshall was the guy that made it work, made the impossible possible. So that's the other thing. You also need people around who can make these ideas that seem difficult or impossible achievable, because that's kind of the definition of Formula One, isn't it? And I think that Newey's view will probably be that if the right people are around in the right place, doing the right things with the right ideas and the right communication, then actually you can deliver things that seem, if not impossible, then incredibly difficult. So that's the tantalising possibility to this. And it's going to be a very, very storied team next year, I think it's safe to say, because there's probably no team, even among the unpredictable nature of the start of 26, there's no team that's kind of got such a wide window in terms of what the storyline potentially could be about how strong it is and the reasons for that, or how weak it is and the reasons for that. So, yeah, this unexpected news just adds a little bit of spice to that, and another chapter to the Adrian Newey story. So thank you very much, John, for jumping on to talk all about that. As you say, those changes are for 26, so it's not immediate effect, but it's going to be a big talking point in the Qatar paddock this weekend. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.